AI agents sound promising, but how do you prove that they're actually worth the investment? And if you're running JD Edwards, how do you know whether an AI agent is creating real business value or just becoming another AI experiment? In today's episode, we'll break down where ROI comes from, which JD Edwards processes make strong first use cases, and what leaders should measure before and after deploying an AI agent. By the end, you'll know why AI agent ROI starts with a measurable business process, not with the technology itself. Welcome back to Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards, the podcast for JD Edwards users who are modernizing, optimizing, and finding new ways to get more value out of their ERP investment. I'm your host, Nate Bushfield, and today we are talking about one of the biggest AI questions for JD Edwards leaders. How do you actually get ROI from an AI agent in JDE? Many organizations are past the curiosity stage. CFOs, CIOs, and JDE leaders are now asking, what value are we getting? Can we measure it? Can we justify the investment? And the key point for this today is AI agents do not automatically create ROI. They create ROI when they are attached to a measurable business process. But joining me today is a first time guest, Kevin Van Horn from ERP Suites. Kevin, welcome to the show. And for those that are out there right now that are like, oh, who's this guy? Could you give them a little bit of background?
Sure, sure. Thank you, Nate, and thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm equal parts excited and nervous because when you've reached that career level where you're on not your grandpa's JD Edwards podcast, it's that you've reached that pinnacle. And I want to do a good job, so I am a recurring guest. But yeah, I'm a long time, old time JD Edwards professional. I started as a customer back in 1990 with waste management, and it was so much fun working with JD Edwards at that point. I joined JD Edwards back in 1994 and stayed with that organization through the acquisitions of PeopleSoft and Oracle, and spent 27 years helping lead the JD Edwards organization for Oracle. And over the last couple of years, I've been working with AI, particularly related to JD Edwards, and just have had a wonderful time working with ERP suites and their leadership in this space. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we are the number two podcast for JD Edwards in the nation right now. So it's very high praise that we get, but I'm sure you'll do great. So before we get into ROI, what are you hearing from JD Edwards customers right now when it comes to AI agents?
Yeah, yeah, it's very, very interesting because the conversation has definitely shifted, right?
Yeah.
We've gone from curiosity to tell me about that to I need it now. I want this, right? So, but the point is, the leaders now are wanting more than just demoware, right? They're wanting more than just kind of vaporware. They want real time solutions that solve real time problems, right? And to get that, they're asking those hard questions, right? What is it going to do for me? How is it going to make my business better, right? How is it moving the needle for the organizations? And it's just with JD Edwards, it's such a AI ready ERP, right? It's such a transaction heavy um, software that it lends itself so well to AI, right? But the leaders are now that they're more than curious, they want to know what's in it for them.
Why do some of these AI projects struggle to show that ROI?
Yeah, yeah. And that you raise a really good point to, how much this has changed just in the last year, right? And digital assistants, th- that that was compelling 2 years ago, right? How do you help JD Edwards users use the solution better, right? But it was more about that kind of training and interaction where agents are actually doing something, right? They're actually doing something. They're actually performing those manual processes that users typically were doing. They weren't just helping, they were doing, right? So the case that the whole kind of paradigm is shifted towards that. So, what's the problem is I need AI isn't a business case. It isn't a use case, right? Um, the business case is a process that needs to be fixed and improved, right? And you know, as I mentioned before, it's gone from curiosity to tell me about it to I need it now, but still, even with that need it now, it's well, I need it now because the board is asking me to use AI, right? Well, that's great. You're on that journey, but using AI isn't the business case, right? The business case
Yeah.
is what is the business process that you're trying to fix, trying to improve? Where are your bottlenecks? Where are too many hands on the keyboard? Where are exception requests that require too many people in the process, right? What are those rule-based business processes that can be improved, really? And that's where it is, right? If you've created a use case around AI that where you don't know the process, you don't know the owner, and you don't know the metric you're trying to improve, you haven't created a use case, right? But the
Yeah.
cool part is if you know all three of those, that's where the magic happens, right? That's where AI could really start driving ROI into your business.
Yeah. Exactly. And some of these people, they don't know the specific use case. They do not know their specific pain points before maybe they have a conversation with one of the many AI teams that are out there in this world.
Sure.
But how would you say that some of these JD leaders should narrow their scope before they even start?
Yeah, yeah, that's another great question. It's and you've kind of you raised a really good point in that question is that, oftentimes um business processes change, right? Based upon business requirements changing, right? Um and they've done so for years upon years, right? And oftentimes those changes are incorporating manual processes into it, right? And
Mhm.
they become kind of a tribal norm to the process. And leaders, maybe it's a new leader who's come into the organization, or maybe it's somebody who has been promoted through the process or through their organization, but they don't even necessarily know that there's a problem in the process because it's just become the process, right? Um, but I think you know, as you mentioned before, it's not AI isn't a magic, well, it's not magic, right? You have to work with your organization or work with a company like ERP Suites where we can go in and talk to the business users and help determine a process that needs to be improved. And the key then is to pick a process that has some volume, that has some complexity, that is rules based, that is repetitive, right? And then we can start understanding those metrics that you're trying to track against, right? Um, Create the baseline, right? You know, we can help you figure out those processes. I mean, that's one of the things we do. But you've got to start with the process, right? You can't start with using AI.
Yeah, exactly. So let's unpack that a little bit deeper there. What is the difference between a useful AI pilot and just another science project?
Yeah, right. Um, Yeah, science projects are about exploring the unknown, right? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's about, the theoretical, right? Where AI pilots should be about improving a specific business use case, right? Um, right. A science project always starts with technology, right? Whether that's, you know, you know, pharmaceutical companies, with R&D with new, drugs, whether it's NASA, creating a project to Mars, whatever it is. Science projects start with technology, right? AI problems, AI pilots start with use cases, right? Um, a useful, like I said before, a useful pilot will have a process, an owner, and a metric to improve, right? The output shouldn't be, well, the AI did its job, right? The AI functioned, right? Um, it's about how did it improve your process in a measurable sort of way, right? Um, if you can't point to that specific process that's slowing you down and say, this is what we're fixing, you're not really running a pilot. Like you said, you're running a science project, right? And that's where ROI is going to be difficult to ascertain at that point, right? I mean, because you're not trying to fix something specifically, you're just trying to use AI.
Yeah. And that's a great distinction. The AI agent itself is not the business case.
Oh,
The process is the true business case.
yeah.
So, if the first step is choosing the right process, the next question truly is, where do AI agents create measurable value inside of JD Edwards?
Yeah.
So, which JD Edwards processes are most likely to produce ROI from an AI agent?
Yeah. That's another great point. I want to take one step back though, because before I answer that question, I want to try to reframe how people are thinking about AI agents, right?
Yeah.
Um, we need to stop thinking about AI agents as a piece of software or code, right?
Mhm.
We need to start thinking about AI agents as digital workers, right? Like somebody who is actually performing action for your organization, within your organization to improve your measurable results, right? JD Edwards is your system of record, right? That's software, right? I mean, it truly is. It's software that's tried and true, right? A digital worker, and I'm going to start calling it that, right? A digital worker interacts with JD Edwards the same way your actual workers do, right? They research problems, right? They process transactions, they make decisions, they follow rules, right? They escalate exceptions. Right? Same thing your people are doing today, right? The difference is these digital workers work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They scale much greater than an actual worker, right? So, when you ask me, what kind of processes in JD Edwards help produce those kind of ROI, um, well, obviously high volume, right?
Yeah.
Repetitive, right? Rules based, right? Um, where there is actual visual, pain within your organization, right? Um, where people are chasing data, where they're chasing approvals, where they're checking statuses, where they're handling exceptions, things of that nature. Those are the areas that digital workers can really excel and help your actual workers, become more value added workers. Right. So, I think that common thread is, you know, the higher the volume, the more predictable the rules are, the more measurable the outcomes are. Those are great places for digital workers to start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself. But let's maybe talk about a specific place where they can start. Like, let's start with accounts payable.
Sure.
Where can an AI agent create measurable value in AP?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, AP is the perfect place to start, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
AP automation has created an entire sub industry just to um, just to try to do things that our current AP agents are excelling at now, right? Um, we have companies all over the place have created AP automation, right? And used old technologies to try to get, invoices into the system without having to manual key punch, right? Um, a digital worker can handle all that front end work, right? It doesn't use OCR, which at its best was 50 to 60%, accurate, right? Um, we can have intelligent documents that are 98, 99% successful at scanning documents and understanding the data, right? So um, our AP agents can pick up invoices from almost anywhere, from email mailboxes, from portals, from cloud storage areas. It can grab invoices anywhere, validate the data, you know, give you kind of the results of that, and actually l- load those into JD Edwards automatically, like it had fingers on the keyboard.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's an excellent place to start, particularly if you have high volumes of invoices.
Yeah. It reduces the time per invoice and even the amount of manual touches
Right. I
that
mean,
could be there.
right. And that's kind of a great measurement. I mean, you can think of all the kind of the historical kind of days payables outstanding, right? Or discounts taken or things of that nature, which are 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 still really important goals for these digital workers to achieve, right? But some of the other goals that these digital workers allow us to track is that thing about human intervention, right? Or first time success rates, or how do we, how time per invoice, right? Things of that nature that allow the digital worker to and actually allow your actual workers to spend more time managing vendors and suppliers and truly critical problems like cash management and all of that, whereas the digital workers can truly start improving those metrics that you're looking at. But yeah, that I mean, AP is the one that could, I mean, if you just think about it, that this is the next evolution of AP automation.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Mhm.
So maybe switching gears here a little bit. What about like order entry? Like how can an AI agent, digital coworker work like help out there?
Yeah, it's interesting because you know sales orders are, personally, to me, they're more complex than AP invoices, right? There's a lot more to them, but
Mm.
EDI has actually helped that quite a bit, right? It has helped automate um, sales orders, into systems and have built that integration between, your customers and your sales order systems, but EDI doesn't do everything, right? And it's funny because I'm working with a customer right now who they have up to 50,000 sales orders a month, but
Yeah.
5,000 of them are manual entered. Right? So,
Jeez.
I mean, if you think about that and say, wow, 50,000 a month, 45,000 are through EDI. Fantastic. How do you enter 5,000 sales orders manually every month, right? And that's the problem they're really trying to solve, right? And it's very similar to the AP agent, right? How do I take some communication from my customers, whether that's a PDF, whether that's an Excel spreadsheet, that into JD Edwards much, much faster than any human could actually type that into the system, right? Particularly thinking that, a sales order could contain a multitude of line items within it, right? So it can get all of those in instantaneously, and then it can read the customers and the items and the pricing and the quantity and the freight instructions and all of that information and make suggestions as to how to best create that sales order, working with the rules that the customer has for their customers and how they want to act. So yeah, sales order is another great place because each of those are just incredibly high volume, incredibly repetitive, but also incredibly, incredibly important. I mean, sales orders are mission critical to organizations, right?
Yeah.
Um, the quicker they can get into the system, the more responsive you can be to your customers. And I think that that is critical, right? That we get sales orders into the system as fast as possible so you can understand, um, you know, the interaction then with your customers, right? Is that order back ordered? What does the freight, when do I need to ship this? When is this going to be available? All those decisions can be made faster, quicker, and more accurately, if we can utilize digital workers to get these into the system.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe, again, maybe switching a little bit here, how could like procurement teams
Jeez,
utilize AI?
procurement is incredible because it's you know you can use our digital procurement workers, from the very beginning of procurement through the entire life cycle. And I'm talking the very
Yeah.
beginning, they can support supplier onboarding, right? Which is
Yeah.
in a lot of organizations is an incredibly cumbersome, time consuming task that requires people to go to multiple screens and multiple applications just to get a supplier into the system in order to buy something from that. Um, you've got procurement professionals and buyers who are spending an enormous amount of time kind of chasing down exceptions, trying to look at supplier risk management, certificates of insurance, and things of that nature, whereas the system should and could be tracking that in real time for you, right? Um,
Yeah.
it needs to understand, where the digital worker can understand where POs, when POs are created, what's their status? What's their projected delivery date? When is, where is it in the process? I talked about it before when we were talking about digital workers that they can actually research and reason, right? I mean, our digital workers can look at a PO that has a delivery date of next week, and if it understands how it's being shipped, it can actually go out to the shipment or company, FedEx or UPS or whatever, and see where that shipment is in real time for us, right? To help monitor that process, right? Um, so yeah, it's all the way through, execution and you know, with my background, there's a thing called, retainage, or, that needs to be held on certain POs. And AI agents can look at that and understand, when to release those and automatically release those retainage payments. So procurement, again, is another sweet spot, right? It really is. It's procurement is one of those ones that there's a lot of manual processes. There's a lot of exceptions. Um, you know, there's a lot of key data points to track. And the cool part about our digital workers is they track them. They track everything all the time, 24 hours a
Yeah.
day, 7 days a week, so that you have all of that information, all, real time, all the time.
Yeah. Visibility truly matters when it
Sure,
comes to procurement,
absolutely.
but but it also matters in maybe a different department of
Mhm.
finance.
Sure.
Where could an AI agent help them during close?
Yeah. Close is such an interesting one to me because it's one, obviously it's repetitive, right? It
Yeah.
happens
Oh,
every
yeah.
month, year after year, month after month, year after year. It always happens, right? And you can argue about, the volume, particularly if you're, an organization that has tremendously high sales orders or invoices or whatnot. But the thing about closing to me, is a and why digital workers for closing are so important, it's because of the time, right?
Yeah.
Closing the books is a is all about timing. How much time? It's about time and coordination, right? So, it's maybe it's not the 50,000 sales orders in a month, but you have to do something in minutes, hours, and days, and have to coordinate all those activities with a number of different people within the team to be able to execute a close flawlessly the way you want to as an organization. And the great part about these digital workers is that collaboration, they collaborate, right? They share information, right? Um, they can track the statuses of different operations and different tasks within that closing process and understand where they are, how much time to completion, what do they need to do, who needs to be involved in that exception processes just to make all of that run smoother, right? I mean, obviously there's components to a close, right? Um, you know,
Yeah.
is do we have an agent that can look at our trial balance and look for exceptions and problems in our
Yeah.
trial balance so that instead of somebody looking at an enormously big trial balance where 98% of the accounts are correct, the digital worker can focus on the 2% that is incorrect, right? Um, Accounts reconciliations, right? It's
Yeah.
the same idea, right? It's the problem with some of these processes is that each month you kind of start anew, right? Our financial professionals are going through systems looking at 98% of accounts that are perfect,
Mhm.
trying to find the 2% that are incorrect. The digital worker could find those immediately, without having to spend all the time looking and allow the financial professional to solve those problems immediately without having to do that research that the digital worker
Yep.
could do. So, I mean, it's when you have a team trying to close the books and they're stretched thin and they're under a lot of pressure, it's nice to have these digital workers working all the time, giving you that information you need.
Mhm. So you're saying that the strongest AI agent or digital worker use case, they're specific, they're measurable, they're
Right.
repetitive,
Right.
and they're tied to a recognizable business plan.
Right.
For JDE customers, that often means AP invoices, order
Sure.
entry, procurement follow up, and close tasks, and also system monitoring. So you're saying the strongest AI agent use cases are specific, they're measurable, they're repetitive, and they're tied to recognizable business pains. For JDE customers, that often means AP invoices, order entry, procurement follow up, and even system monitoring.
Mhm.
So now let's say a company has picked one of those processes. How do they calculate the true business case?
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
what what should they measure before deploying an AI agent?
yeah, yeah. I mean, and this might sound intuitive, but in speaking with customers, it's often not, right? But
Mm,
they've got to document the baseline, right? That you've got to understand where you are today, right? And you know, obviously people understand problems, right? You know what I mean?
yeah.
They understand, hey, our we've got so many invoices and it takes so long for our people to enter those. And it's like our days payables outstanding is growing and we're not taking discounts and all of these things are happening. And so that's where, documenting that baseline. And that's why that's so important, right? Um, I'd argue that, you look at so many JD Edwards customers, right? And when they created these processes, whatever it might be, like, and you mentioned it, I mean, JD Edwards is full of these type of processes, right? Um,
Yeah.
we've talked about financials, we talked about payables, we talked about sales and distribution. We talked about, there's inventory allocation, there's reconciliations, there's procurement, there's projects, there's service, there's so many different areas that any one of these problems can occur, right? But they've created these processes years ago and they're often their business has changed, right? So they understand the process, right? But
Yeah.
they understand that there's a pain in the process, but they haven't necessarily documented that process as where is my baseline? Where is my stake in the ground, right?
Yeah.
Um, they've acquired companies, they've started new business lines, the things like that. And so the first thing is understand your process volume, right? Whatever it might be,
Yeah.
like how many transactions, and what's the repetition of those transactions, right? I mean, we talked about invoices, you know, they're every day, all the time, right? Sales orders every day, all the time. Or financial close. Well, this is monthly, but it's this, right? So the volume, what is the volume? Um, how much time are you spending on that volume, right? What is the time of the transaction? How long does it take for somebody to actually do that, right? Um, how many manual touches does it take to support that, right? So, I mean, they kind of go together, right, for the time, but we have, I mentioned it before. You go just to try to do supplier onboarding, and there's 4 or 5 different screens it takes to be able to get them a supplier up and running, right? So there's 5 or 6 different manual touches. It might take 15 minutes, and there's 5 or 6 manual touches, right? Another big one is what's the exception rate? What are the error rate? The more manual it is, the higher the error rate's going to be, right? How much rework needs to be done. But, ultimately, you're going to be able to find out all those things by talking to people, right? And
Yeah.
actually working with them. Um, because they tell you things that your documentation doesn't, right? They tell you the truth, um, where and it was that thing we talked about before. It's that, they so sometimes companies that put in manual steps to solve a business problem at a given time, and they just become part of the process, right? And then ultimately, as the business change, they become part of the problem, right? So by talking to your people and trying to work through that process, what is the volume? How much time does it take? How many keystrokes does it take? What's the exception and error rates? You're gonna find that from talking to people, and
Yeah.
that then gives us the metrics to build upon, right?
Yeah. And yeah. So we have the metrics now to build upon.
Yeah.
What should leaders then measure after an agent is deployed?
Yeah, yeah. So the future state, we
Yeah.
talked about the current state, right? So what is the future state, right? So, um, I'm always gonna go back to the most important thing, which is time. right?
Mhm.
And how much, so the first thing is how much time are we saving in the organization, right? How much manual work is reduced, right? How much exceptions or errors are reduced, right? So, understanding time, is going to be a huge component to track in the future, right? The human intervention is another key one, right? Whereas, if we've created these digital workers correctly, and I realize this can be something that happens and evolves over time, but they can they can perform these tasks autonomously, right? So the lower the human intervention rate, the better, right? That means the digital worker is doing a better job, a good job, right? So, um, and and I think we all realize and that when companies are deploying their first digital worker, they might want to have that human in the loop, right? They might want to have, those humans, that human intervention to ensure that that digital worker is doing things the right way. But over time, what we really want to see is that human intervention rate go down, because that really means your people are able to focus on more value added processes and not this manual process that we're solving with our digital worker, right? Um, Adoption is a big one. Um, you know, and that really goes, I mean, and you talked about it in the very beginning, digital assistants were great back when they started, but the adoption wasn't really what we hoped it would be, right?
Yeah.
It was an extra step in the process for people to go and ask the digital worker, what to do, right? So adoption wasn't what we wanted it to be, right? What we hope now is that the adoption, you know, and if you think about it, there are different types of agents, right? There are different types of digital workers. There are transactional, which the adoption should be 100%, right? But there's other digital workers that are more um, analytical, right? They're more suggestive. They're helping you do research. They're making recommendations as opposed to performing autonomous tasks, right? Um, and we want to see those adopted, right? We want to see those recommendations being agreed upon and executed automatically, because that's going to help all those other things. Now, the last piece that I'll say is, and this is one that I would think is often overlooked, is don't overlook employee satisfaction.
Yeah.
Y you know, people were everybody is hesitant about AI, right? It's going to take my job. It's going to do this. And simultaneously, they're also complaining about doing mind-numbing repetitive work, right? So if we can get a digital worker to do that repetitive work, how much does that help the satisfaction of the employees that they're doing more value add work? They're helping make business decisions that are helping the company be successful, right? And just that, that ability has truly have to improve, the employee morale and the employee engagement, right? And really kind of foster that organizational cultural type improvement that these digital workers can, right? I mean, we get the fact. I mean, everybody's nervous about what AI is going to do to workers, right? What we hope they do is we hope they make workers more valuable, right? They that
Yeah.
they can do they can do all the things we want them to do if they didn't have to do all the manual stuff that we don't want them to do.
So the ROI categories, they usually fall under a few buckets
Yeah.
like labor capacity, cycle time reduction, error reduction, exception reduction, scalability, visibility,
Mhm.
risk reduction, and even the avoided hiring or overtime, which is what
Yeah.
you were just talking about.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're right, that has such a big role into employee satisfaction
Yeah.
for many reasons, but it
Yep.
also helps out the business.
Yep.
But one of those places companies can overstate ROI and goes with that customer satisfaction, they can overstate the ROI in labor savings because
Yeah.
that's not really what that does. It allows your labor to not work that overtime. So, yes, there's some savings there. But all in all, it's about giving them meaningful work.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how should leaders think about labor savings without
Yeah.
overstating this ROI?
Yeah. I mean, that's the tricky part, right?
Mhm.
That's often this is where the ROI conversation can go sideways if we're not careful, right?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, you raised a great point, right? Um, if you deploy a digital worker, let's just say we deploy our AP digital worker, and you currently have a staff of 5 people that are doing this full time, right? And it saves them 2 hours a day, right? Okay. Well, so it saved us 10 hours a week, right? That's that's not a person, right?
Yeah.
You're not necessarily getting rid of a person, right? You've freed up capacity, right? Um, and this is why we talked about earlier that going back to thinking that you're instead of having to go through the recruitment and onboarding and the perpetual, the whole hire to retire process, you know, we can help go through the onboarding process of a digital worker, right? Um, and what that allows, to your point, is it helps free up capacity for higher value work, right?
Yeah.
Now, in the future, well, no, I mean, to your point too, it's like there are some hard savings, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Sure.
there's hard savings of reducing overtime, right?
Yeah.
There's hard savings, eh, but the other hard savings will be your y- your headcount planning, right? You know, need
Mhm.
like, you know, I'm working with a company now that's trying that's going through an acquisition phase, right? And they literally can't hire enough people, right, to
Yeah.
take on the new volume, right? So it's going to limit or inhibit them from achieving their results, right? But a digital worker can help that, right? Without having to grow headcount. So um it's not about headcount reduction, it's about having a new model for headcount planning in the future.
Yeah.
And what's the balance of people human people, right, versus digital speed,
Mhm.
right? And it's all that. So yeah, that's something that, we really you really have to consider, right? And not be about this is about labor reduction, right? This is about labor efficiency, right? And that's going to help you create a more realistic ROI model than saying, "Oh, this is going to let me get rid of 5 people." 'Cause that's not going to happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's also that side of it of there's a reduced turnover
Oh,
of
yeah,
a
right.
lot of your employees. And if we're talking about cost, that means you have to spend the money to go in a completely new hiring process.
Yep,
And then you have to take the time to train that employee.
right.
And it just gets to the point where you're spending so much money
Oh,
just to fully transform what your business looks like right now for these like few people that are working on your team.
yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
just
you're absolutely right. I mean, you're not trying to replace people, you're trying to build an environment where people want to stay, right? And the more, and that's a great, we talked a little bit a few questions ago about the metrics, and we did talk about employee satisfaction, but employee turnover, right?
Mhm.
That's real money, right? That's real dollars, and those are significant dollars, right?
Yeah.
They're hard to quantify on day 1, right? They truly are. I mean, we all get that, right? Um, but I think if you take that step back and stop thinking about this as software and code and start thinking about these digital workers that help support your people, then it
Mhm.
becomes it becomes a different conversation, and you frame it differently as you're talking thinking about ROI, because digital workers are here to help our people, right? They're here to increase their, not just the intangibles as we talked about of increasing all the key business operating metrics, but also to make your current employees' jobs more satisfying and to reduce their turnover. Nobody wants people leaving. It causes disruption that in many cases takes weeks, months, years to replace.
Yeah.
The more we can stop, the more we can slow that, the better the organization is.
Exactly. So, what would you say are some of the most common mistakes that create fake or even inflated ROI in an AI project?
Yeah. It's funny you say that because it's one of the things that I've been seeing is that because of all the things that we were just talking about, right? Um, Most ROI estimates for digital workers are underestimated, not
Mhm.
overestimated. I mean, and we're perfectly okay with that, right?
Yeah.
When we're looking to build these ROI cases, I mean, I think everyone is more comfortable with conservative is better, right? Um, but you know, we don't have to go with those extreme numbers, right? But what I've also seen is we can see some really incredible extreme result improvements, but with these digital workers,
Mhm.
right? So, but it's better to be pleasantly surprised than come in, um,
Yeah.
disappointed with the ROI, right? So, don't base your ROI on the demo, right? Demos are running on sample datas and things happen fast, and and you're running on real data that and the system, if the system is trying to do research and trying to look up stuff, that time is going to count, right? Um, use a uh, use an average baseline, not your best case, right? So, when we talked about that baseline before, that baseline's over a period of time. Don't pick your best week, don't pick your worst week, right? Pick the average. Obviously there are real hard costs associated with kind of development and implementation of these agents, right? These digital workers, just like you had before when you're trying to hire somebody and onboard and train and all that, so there are those costs. But, and we talked about that labor savings, that the labor savings really comes from two things, right? It comes from scale, right? To be
Yeah.
able to grow your business without having to grow headcount, right? And it also comes from not having to hire new people, right? Um,
Yeah.
and having a more engaged workforce, right? So, you know, again, be conservative. And, I can almost promise you the results are going to exceed your expectations. And that's a good thing, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So, if your organization is exploring AI for JD Edwards, the best place to start is not just with technology.
Right.
Start with the process.
Sure.
Where's your team doing repetitive manual work? Where are expectations slowing things down? Where are people rekeying data chasing approvals, checking statuses, or relying too heavily on scarce JD Edwards experience. ERP Suites helps JD Edwards customers evaluate AI
Yep.
opportunities, identify measurable use cases, and connect automation to real business outcomes across finance, operations, managed services, consulting, and especially modernization. To learn more, connect with ERP Suites at erpsuites.com or reach out to Kevin directly. That's a wrap, though, for today's episode of Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. The biggest takeaway is this: AI agents create ROI when they are attached to measurable business processes, not when they're treated like generic AI experiments. For JD Edwards customers, strong first opportunities often live in AP automation, order entry, procurement follow up, finance close, and even CNC operations. Thanks again to Kevin for joining us and sharing your perspective. Seriously, this has been fantastic. You're one of
Thank
the
you for
best guests
having
we
me.
had on so far.
Thank you for
I
having me. I
will,
hope I get invited
of
back,
course.
right? So
Oh, I'm sure you will. I don't know if it's an invite or you must come back. So we'll figure that out. But if you found this episode helpful, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another JD Edwards leader who is trying to separate AI hype from real business value. But until next time, keep modernizing, keep optimizing, and keep getting more value from JD Edwards. Catch you next time.